Hi, I'm Salma and I am a terrible developer. If you're new to this channel, hello, I write code for your entertainment live on Twitch. And here's a story about how I didn't read documentation again, and about how reading documentation can actually save you a lot of time, obviously. Since 2020, I've been working on my Twitch bot. It's an Express application that powers the viewer interactions and events when I'm live streaming on Twitch. Recently, I started using Sentry to monitor errors and crashes in my Twitch bot, and it's already helped me squash quite a few bugs that were entirely a result of my own terrible code. This video is not sponsored, but full disclaimer, I do work for Sentry. So recently, I triggered an error in my Twitch bot via a call to the Twitch API, which I thought was Twitch's fault. It was my fault, obviously. Turns out, surprise, surprise, I didn't read the documentation. But this whole thing reminded me of how important it is to send representative and correct HTTP status codes with your API responses, especially error responses. So what triggered the error? When streaming on Twitch, you can shout out other streamers. When you're live, it shows a CTA at the top of your Twitch chat and sends a notification to that streamer's dashboard. When I shout out a streamer, my Twitch bot also sends a message to my chat with some more information about the streamer, such as their latest stream and the category they were streaming in. And this is all done via a variety of calls to the Twitch API to build up the response. Recently, I tried to shout out a Twitch user, and I made a typo. So I was asking my Twitch bot to look up a user that didn't exist. So this triggered an issue in Sentry and highlighted that I hadn't coded defensively enough around this API call in my Twitch bot. And through further inspection of the breadcrumb trail in Sentry that led to this error, I noticed what I thought was bad code in the Twitch API. Sorry, Twitch devs. The breadcrumb that came before the error exception was an HTTP call to the Twitch API. It was requesting data for a user via a login name string. Clearly, this user didn't exist, but the HTTP status code that was returned with the API response was HTTP 200. This was indicating that everything was okay. Everything was not okay, at least in my application. I double-checked this in the browser by navigating to twitch.tv/the typo I made. And in the network tab, we also see an HTTP 200 status code. But I was expecting a 404, not found. Often, when dealing with API responses, it's good practice to check the status code of the response in order to know how to proceed accordingly in your code. For example, you may only want to send a welcome email to a new customer after the HTTP status code you receive from the account creation API returns a 201, which means created. However, in this case, checking the status code of the response wouldn't actually have helped. Here's the response data logged to the terminal for the request I made with the typo. Notice how Sentry has added the Sentry trace header to the Twitch API call to connect the dots between my application and external HTTP calls. Now, technically, this response is okay. We have a response object containing a property named data, which is an empty array. Nothing is actually wrong or malformed here. But why was I getting an HTTP 200 when I was expecting a 404? The answer lies in the design of the Twitch API and was actually implied in the shape of the data that I logged to the terminal. And it's actually on the documentation as well. The user's endpoint provided by the Twitch API allows you to get information for one or more users. Of course, the endpoint is /users, plural, not /user, singular. And this is perfectly aligned with RESTful API design. Using this API endpoint, I can request data for up to 100 users. And if just one out of 100 requests contained a typo and that caused the API response to completely error, that would be a pretty poor developer experience. So initially, I didn't read the docs, I misunderstood what /users did, so let that be a lesson to me. So how did I fix my code? My Twitch bot contains a wrapper around the Twitch users API, which purposefully allows me to request data for one user only. Here's the original code that caused the error when I received an empty response. This makes a call to the Twitch API with the required credentials and performs an account age check for security reasons. Given the data property of the response from Twitch was empty, data 0 did not exist when I tried to access the created@. property. Now, to make my code more resilient, I've now added a check for the length of the data array. And if I make a typo, I send a message to my Twitch chat to tell me I made a typo. And after all, a typo isn't an application error. It's a user error. It's on me. This may seem obvious now, and it's not uncommon. And let me know in the comments if you've done something like this before because you didn't read documentation. So why did I tell this story? Understanding the shape of API responses and handling those correctly depending on the HTTP status codes you expect can help you build more robust applications and cause fewer errors. And importantly, considering the design of the API and the types of HTTP status codes you'll get back from the API leads to a better understanding of API design and especially RESTful API design itself. And because I really have seen HTTP 200 status codes returned with API responses that did error, here's 4 tips to consider when building APIs. Number 1, return correct and representative HTTP status codes with your API responses. Number 2, return consistent and predictable data structures, like Twitch did. Number 3, return organized data. Don't rely on the API consumer to order items unnecessarily, calculate arbitrary values, or remove items from the response that they don't need. And number 4, decide when an error really is an error. Is an empty response an error, or is it actually okay? And when consuming APIs, don't do what I did. Read the documentation. Understand how the API is designed and code defensively around unexpected results. And if you really don't have the time for all that, you can use a tool like Sentry to help you find those bugs. And if you want to test your knowledge on HTTP status codes, I built a quiz. It's called Game of Codes. The link's in the description. Take the test. Let me know if you got 10 out of 10. I still struggle. And I built the thing.